Hey everyone, good afternoon. I didn't really think there was a point in streaming earlier just because we basically held off our channel, held core ranges overnight. This would have been better had we held 6638 like we discussed in the report, because that would have given us an odd of clearing these areas here in real time. It wasn't that big of a deal though because they still managed to give that full structure break. This is like roughly 12 to 13 points. But anyway, this is just what could have allowed for those tests early on to the 66, 78, 66, 80s. We had that area broken with pretty good strength right here. So this is another reason why I felt like they could continue to clear and break. We won't cover too much about what happened because it's pretty straightforward. We basically hit our core ranges, sustained in real time. Weekly report stated that today is the earliest odd of testing 6722, 6732 with odds of getting to 6738, 6744. When I did the math, where we open and where we close and where we held, these are all really calculated spots for us, especially the 6657, 6654 area. These are technically core ranges. When we held 43 to 44 points back here, I figured that there's probably an odd that they might aim for like an 88 point range in real time, specifically off those real time lows. So we could maybe watch this for the overnight session, but for real time, I would imagine that they're probably a little bit stuck right here. I don't know if you guys can see this. Do you see this? So definitely some overhead around 6734, 6735. Off the actual session open, I think it was closer to somewhere close to here, I think, like closer to the 44, 43. And then off the overnight lows, I did measure this and I figured that they're probably ranging the 107 point ratios. I highly doubt that we can get 128 points in real time today. Like, it was going to be pretty hard. But do you guys see how there's a lot of overhead around the 6730s? And maybe had they held closer to this range here instead like we wanted. I noticed that this was the 66 point break off overnight right here. Do you guys see that? When they stalled this morning and then they came back and held. This was also a 44 point hold right here. So this area was a really good spot to go long. And then I noticed that when they came back and brought it up right here, they did take out 88 points from like the overnight lows. So this is kind of where they're like situated right now, around the 25 area. And this area should align with that 107 point range right around that 67.44. So I would say with confidence that 6744, 46, 48 is going to be a huge spot for us to break. And that's what could get us those extensions back. Basically back to previous week's close, previous week's open at 6765. Do you guys see the confluence here? We're only going to cover this once really quick. This is probably the 107 off this range right here. Okay. And this is probably very close to being the upper 70s. So these areas up here give us higher odds off like the real-time lows to actually break and get back to the 6770s, 6780s. Whereas here there could be some overhead in between like the 6752, 58, 56, so on and so forth. So let's just take a quick peek because we had some end of day odds today. I figured that they could just keep this stuck, especially if they don't start breaking around this 3.6 mark. See how they kind of stalled? We had some other odds here at 4.5. Again, they stalled, and they keep stalling this 2.5 50 area, which again is that calculated range off those overnight lows. Which could get you overnight highs if they can clear and break in time. So my thoughts going into the closes, they really don't have to do much here. Like, if they pin it between 2.2, 2.5, that's fine. I feel like anything above 2.5 is more ideal. As much as I would love 67, 31, 32, 33 areas to trigger, it's fine if they do it after the bell. my thoughts were if they keep this beneath 2.5 before 350, then we probably have reduced odds. If they can clear this range here by 350, then we have odds of testing 3.2, 3.5. Everyone's on the same page? I think it's a pretty straightforward close, to be honest with you. There isn't really much to it. The worst case scenario would be closing back in like these neutral areas just because there's less confluence here, and that could imply some volatility. But I don't think they would do that. Like, I don't think they would have taken it to 67.29 if they're going to pin it at like 67.06 or 67.12, but who knows? I guess it kind of depends on what they do by 350. So far, these reduction sticks too are implying that they want to keep this stuck, because even that's already an 8-point reduction, which could have brought us to that 3.4. Do you see what I'm saying? Had they pushed this in time closer to the 4.5, 4.8 mark. All right, so let's just see what they do here. What do you guys think? Let's do a quick poll here. Clear high a day in real time. I'll set that for only 2 minutes since 350 is coming up here. If you guys can vote on that. You guys think that they can clear that in real time, or you think they keep this relatively stuck? What do you guys think? We don't have that many viewers today. I didn't really add everyone though. I think them even taking it back to like bull neutral, like between 17, 18, 19 at 350 could imply some slight volatility. If they want to keep this pinned into the close though, it would make sense that they want to bring it down during this period so that they have room to bring it back up, because they would kind of like reduce range here just a tiny bit if they wanted to keep it stuck in between here. Does that make sense? They'd have to have some quick turnarounds. I had an actual flip at 5.1 today though. But again, these are really calculated spots. How did you guys do today? I hope you guys did well today. You guys should have done well today, and you should have avoided over trading this afternoon. Only spots you could have tried longs this afternoon was off of 67.20. Maybe back here, cut this when they stalled. Maybe a re-entry off of here, off 14, but everyone in here should have had the early entries long back in here. And targeting at least this area here, and then this area here. So I did have a flip at 5.1, so that's why I wasn't too worried about the 50 stick coming down. Yeah, it was pretty good. I had a swing in Intel. I did cover most of this though when they ended up stalling. I traded some gold today too, which was good. And then crypto had that bounce back that we talked about, guys, between the 22nd and 24th. I don't know if anyone saw that. And MARA is getting a really big range break back above that 976 area. So these were just some individual trades that also did pretty good. Some individual names did not bad this morning either. Like Amazon had a pretty good move and then stalled. Apple had a good move and then stalled. Google had a decent move and then stalled. So a lot of names kind of just came to a halt after things kind of stopped moving. So we're going to see if ES can have a bit of a break around that 5.455. This is probably the cutoff window here. What did you guys vote? Only 6 people voted, so majority voted no, that they'd keep it stuck. Okay. Nice, Gators, I'm glad. So I would say that if they can't get this back over 2,550 by that 5.5 mark, then we probably have very low odds of taking out high of day. If they can get it back to 2,550 and clear, then I think the odds are pretty good that we can still get 3,132 today. But you'd have to have some progressive sticks, especially off like this 5-3 stick being this aggressive is required because you already had risk down at 19. Do you see what I'm saying? Because if you can clear as early as 5-4, then your 5-4, 5-5 sticks give you good odds. This is a really good stick break, guys, for 353 ahead of 350, 455. They're trying to keep those odds in play. And I did feel like we had decent odds of getting a real-time break, but maybe not to 4-4, but maybe to like at least 3-1, 3-2 with a slight probability of the 3-3, 3-5 area. Mostly if they can bring it back around end of day, like final minutes. So 6-7-2, 550 cleared at 5-3 ahead of 5-4, 5-5. This gives some decent odds of retesting and clearing high of day by the 54, 55 sticks, which can keep us basically durational into close. What does that usually mean, guys, when we're durational into close? And this is why I'm kind of disappointed with those answers you guys gave. What does that usually mean if you're durational into close? What time do you trigger high of day? What time would you trigger high of day if you're durational into the close? Yeah, like literally end of day, right? So 67.31 being tested here right at 355. 67.31.75 is extremely calculated. Our spots today are 3.250, 3.4, and 3.550 was my max range for real time. If they take that out, then we have those odds of getting our 3.8 and 4.4. I don't really think that that's required though. But I did think that we had some odds of at least tagging that 3.1, 3.2 area, which we just did. So let's see if they have any momentum here for continuation. 3.175 stall so far, which is basically the top of the zone. This should be closer to here. All right, where do you guys think they'll pin the close here? I'm going to mute myself here into the close, okay? Definitely should have covered something there, guys, just because they stalled at 55. Like, usually if 355 doesn't continue to push, especially after hitting a major overhead like that, because 3,250 is a little bit more calculated today for us, then you typically have odds of reversing, especially if they want to pin the close, because this is the pinnable close. So if they want to pin it right at the 2.5, 3.1, 3.2 area, they might have to reduce it just to bring it back up. So give me a pin, guys. Where do you think that they could pin the close? Come on, I guided you guys throughout the entire session today, from open, from overnight. The least you guys can do is at least give me a pin for where you guys think market makers would close this. 2.4. 2.4 is too low. I feel like you need at least over 2,550. Which technically I guess is like 100 points from like last week's, from Friday's close. That would make sense if they want to keep it a little bit conflicted. Maybe because they did take it and cross it back over here. Like, I feel like these breaks down here, are you guys listening? Like, these right here, these breakdowns right here, this is probably what's preventing us from getting those better... Like, I would have preferred that they held a little bit above 14 even. You know what I mean? Like, that could have gotten us, like, the breaks to 3.9. I would bet money if they held closer to 20... Okay, like closer to this area here, this could have gotten us 4.4. Do you see what I'm saying? Like these areas here and these reductions is kind of what stalled us a little bit. And even like the 14 area, if they would have just held the neutral zone, I feel like they could have triggered that 3.2, 3.5 in real time. We had better odds for after the bell anyway, so let's just see where they take this back to for 3.59. I would say if the first 30 seconds... can trigger back over 2,550, especially on that 30-second turnaround, then they have odds of trying to get back to 3.1, but even pinning anywhere near 2.2, 2,550, these are all really calculated spots. I just wouldn't really want to pin beneath 20. Like, I feel like pinning beneath 20 would not be a good look, which we do have an odd of doing since they breached this area here, okay? 67, 1875. I would say that kind of a pin could keep volatility alive. I guess we'll have to see if they can retract this back into the session close. So far, that's a 14-point reduction in range, which I think nets us to our 674446. Yeah, it does. And those were the max ranges we had for the session anyway. So they're trying to compress this just a little bit from getting to the 674446. But at least we can say with confidence that that's definitely going to be the area of confluence if they come back and clear a 3.2. Any questions, guys, before I end the stream? I just wanted to kind of walk you through. What they could do into session close, basically. We had better odds for overnight session today, like I mentioned this morning. So I feel like overnight conditions, if we can... someone had mentioned going back to like here, like 8.8 and 9.6. Honestly, I want to avoid the bear zone at this point. If they want to test neutral zones, fine. Okay, like this area here, okay. But I feel like with this kind of a close, we're probably better off trying to avoid that. Okay, hold these lows and then take out this area first, okay? Then at that point, I don't give a shit what they do. They can come back, do whatever they want. But I feel like we have to get to the channel and take out 3.2, 3.6, 3.8, 4.4, 4.6 before we can have some bigger legs down. Otherwise, that volatility could just take you all the way back to where we started. Does that make sense? And we did have some better odds for overnight anyway. Plus, I feel like taking it to the channel overnight could help us in terms of reducing overall risk exposure for the next 2 sessions. It is a shorter week too, so markets close Thursday and then we have a half day Friday. So then the range over the next 2 days is very important. Okay, if you guys are good on your end, I'm going to end the stream. I think there isn't really too much more to add. You guys can also repost the Substack too. I don't know why views on Substack are down a little bit lately, but I definitely feel like these posts can help people. We still were able to capture a pretty, especially if you went long Friday into Friday's close, off core areas, like we still captured an 88-point move. So this is still really progressive in terms of where we closed. Where we opened, this is still a 66-point break. Okay, so you know, maybe we can keep those odds of getting our 128, 132 point ranges, which could take us back to the zone this week. That's kind of the bigger goal for those that are just tuning in is to ideally get back to 6788, 6765. Basically retest those ranges from the 20th and 17th, because our 24th candle and our 28th candles are linked with the 17th, right? So the odds of maybe getting those retests of the 6800s are potentially in play. And since we had some core opening ranges, like in mid-core areas in the 50s, and some core closes here, I think we could be setting up for those 6820s, hopefully. That's going to be the most ideal scenario for us this week, okay, is if they can somehow manage to get us that kind of a structure break. And getting even back to the zone is going to be a 256 point break right here from those lows last week, like we talked about, and getting these structure breaks right here off of Friday's open is going to be that 256 point break at the least. And from this week's open, like we talked about, that's a 173 point move back to these areas here, which basically could get us back to the 256 ranges, back to these all-time high open close, basically, okay? And maybe one final shot at, drum roll, what would be our last final shot for the year to get where? 7K, okay? Everyone's on the same page. These areas are all really aligned to this 7,000 mark, okay? And they have to start moving in increments here if they want to do that. So if they had 171, 172 point hold, basically half of 346, this would set us up, but with the condition that we get to these areas this week. So it'd be like our same weekly conditions from the week before reset. And remember how I said this 3-bar pattern right here? Where is it? This 3-bar pattern right here is kind of what set up this nasty volatility in the first place. Right here. This mid-supply. It's the same thing as taking it back above the mid-supply range. And ironically enough, that area here is 6,827. And the 173 point break off this week's open is 6,828.25. Or 6,200. I think it's actually exactly at that 27 spot. Yeah, it is. 2775. Do you see that? Isn't that insane? So in theory, it could basically bring it back to this mid-supply range up here. Okay? And that would kind of look something like this if they did that. This is assuming they got back to the 6.5 areas here. I feel like the first half of the week, though, is what would have to push, since the market's closed on Wednesday or on Thursday. But that's what that would look like. And getting back to here is what could give us those, basically getting back to that all-time high zone potentially. I don't know if we can do that this week, because I did say that that would be a pretty big push to get us back to like 6,880s. I don't think that they could do that this week. I feel like that's a bit too much of a range break, because that is basically us getting 256 points off last week's close. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So 256 points off last week's close, right? Or this week's lows. Are you guys listening? Could get us back to those 80s. That's what could get us back to the all-time high zone of 6,888, 6,932. I don't think that those odds are that high for this week, but depending on what we do, I guess, over the next 2 days, really. I feel like unless we tested 6820s as early as Wednesday, then maybe we have an odd. But I was thinking more so that they could just keep it channel bound if they break this range. So if they did get above 68 20s and 30s, Maybe they just take it back to the 68.38, 68.44. That's the channel that put us at risk in the first place because they failed to digest this area here. Remember? These 40s and 30s. So that wouldn't really be a bad place to situate this before month end. And then at least it keeps some odds in play. But I feel like in general, most people never saw this coming. I feel like most people probably thought that we were going to have a massive drop Friday and today. So either way, we're still ahead of most people. Because I do think that most people thought that this was going to have a continuation down. But this core hold kind of just told us exactly what we need to see. So green area is core, back to green area, core. Core to core moves usually imply core breaks. So if we get a core break this week from the 20s here, it could give us those odds of the 68.20s up here. Basically like a very dumbed down way of putting this. Okay? Is we could get basically the structural retest of these areas here. Everyone is on the same page there with that, because I'm not going to cover too much until I'll probably do I usually don't do 2 reports on shorter weeks, but maybe just some notes or something. Maybe I'll issue those tomorrow, because I think by tomorrow it'll depend if we're back to the 67-65 area, which we already mentioned that being the 128 point range here, right? If they bring us back to off the closing point, 132, 100, yeah, 33 point range would be back to here. So maybe if they get us back to these areas here as early as tomorrow, like the 67-60s, okay, then that odd is going to start to increase of getting these zone entries here. That would probably be the minimum condition. So conditions for overnight are going to be overnight conditions, sustain core ranges ideally above 67.20, but have room to test neutral ranges to 67.08, 67.14. Better if we sustain below neutral instead. Since there is a lot of risk beneath, I'd love to avoid the 6688, 6692, 6696, 6699 area as much as possible. So avoid bear zone and calculated range. So, which if you forgot, 6692 was the 30, I think the 36,631 close. I think, yeah, those were the 66 point ranges. And they were also the 66 point ranges off of, or the 34 point ranges off of session open today, right? Real-time session open. This means we sustain 66, 68 points off Friday's close, this week's open, and 34 points off session open for futures and US real time. Okay, this is what can help get us 88 point breaks and 128, 132 points in range, aka back to previous weekly close, weekly open at 6764, 6765, and potentially reset this time to core ranges closer to 6766, 6768, 6771, 6778, 6781, and potentially even the zone. Okay, 6788, which is also calculated off of, we said 6788 was calculated off of the 6788 subtract 132 is what? 6756, right? 132 points off of 6756. 665 area. Okay. Getting to 67.65 as early as tomorrow is what can give us odds of zone entries this week and 68.20's retest. Lastly, 6735, 6738, 6744, 6746 remains a massive overnight overhead. Ideally, we want to nest back in the channel tonight to avoid major volatility risk and increase odds of a core day tomorrow and zone day for Wednesday. Okay, zone day would be, of course they can obviously get it there sooner, but you guys know what I'm saying. While we have odds for 6888 zone this week, we'll monitor closely since those odds are now reduced after stalling 6732 and not breaking to 6744 in real time today. Okay, 6744, 6746 today would have highly increased those odds, and now that is reduced. We're still within our weekly price ranges. You can also refer back to previous reports because they're quite calculated around these spots. I feel like you could use the report from 2 weeks ago if you wanted to for the resets. All right, and I think that's it. So I will post these to Twitter too. And all right, everyone have a good afternoon.